Becky, if you want to mute yourself for now.
Oh, mute myself? Okay.
Should be good to go, Joel.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I am Joel Whitney. I should be on camera now. Once again, I'm Joel Whitney. It pleases me to welcome you to see so many of you here tonight for tonight's poetry event with Rebecca Half-Lowry. This is part of two series joined tonight as one. Many of you have been following our Lenapehoking exhibition since its January opening, and hopefully some of the associated panels we've held on history and environmentalism and missing and murdered Indigenous persons. Tonight, we're here with Rebecca Half-Lowry, who is a citizen of the Delaware Tribe of Indians, headquartered in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And she herself has a major work in the exhibition I just mentioned, which was curated by Joe Baker and the Lenape Center, which is the New York City-based arts and cultural advocacy org for the Delaware Tribe of Indians. So coming up still in that series are several more talks on such topics as returning Lenape seeds to Lenapehoking and plant medicine and more. You can find those at bklynlibrary.org/Lenapehoking, and we'll drop that in the chat in a bit. But this is also part of another series too, generously supported by the Poetry Foundation. In this recurring series, BPL Presents features Indigenous poets from across the continent who explore the art of poetry in Poetry Month, which is April. We are continuing the series through our spring into summer season. Rebecca is the current reader of honor, and it's a pleasure to turn it over to her in a moment. But also coming into the series, we have Kinsell Drake, Hyde Erdrich, and N. Scott Momaday, and among others. We'll drop the series link for the rest of the Indigenous Poets series into the chat as well. And you can also follow us on social media at BPL Presents. That's the handle for all of these. But as I say, tonight we're so pleased to have Becky as both an art contributor to the Lenapehoking exhibit, but also reading from her poem, some of which are about the work that she created for the exhibit, which is the Turkey Feather Cape. Rebecca Half-Lowry, as I say, is a citizen of the Delaware Tribe of Indians, headquartered in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Rebecca is an educator, social worker, poet, and Lenape feather weaver. Her creation, the Cape of the Matriarch, is displayed in our Greenpoint branch at Brooklyn Public Library through the end of this month. In partnership with the tribe, she develops decolonial curriculum for classes, elementary through college, on Indigenous worldviews, creative writing, and social emotional skills. Her anthology of poetry, Lenape Journeys, was publicly performed on Little Island in Manhattan last July. A children's book featuring lessons of Lenape feather weaving is in development, and Rebecca also serves on the advisory council of the Lenape Center. So without further interruption from me, please welcome Rebecca Lowry home to Lenapehoking.
Oh, good evening. I want to thank the Lenape Center and the Brooklyn Public Library for hosting me this evening. I've was very honored to reconnect with my relative, Joe Baker, the executive director of the Lenape Center during the past few years. And I was so happy to be able to contribute a turkey feather cape to this exhibition. I learned the twine method of weaving about 20 years ago from a Yurok weaver. And those skills were definitely useful as we were figuring out the feather weaving process. along with the regalia making skills of my mother-in-law, Sandra Lowry of the Yurok tribe. So these first few poems I'm going to read to you tonight were written after I completed the Turkey Feather Cape project. As I read, we will show you some pictures of the cape making process and also the finished product. So at this time, we'll have the first slide put up. And thank you for bearing with me. I'm just getting over being sick, so I might have to sip tea from time to time. So this first poem is called Feather Cape Returns. 1. What shells are to water, feathers are to air. Like the lovely turkey feather, move in wind and water. Light sends waves of color, quiet collisions, radiation. What is bronze in morning will be blue by 3. 2. If feathers were integers, her back is broad. One size of infinity moves across, her back is broad. Tail feathers flip up and down in wind, her back is broad. Small plumage pairs up by size and quill. Ratty feathers fall, mistakes cut out. Her spine pushes up like a quill. 3. A cape hung over a branch in Lenapehoking, raised by a strange wind, flew across the expanse before landing on a cliff at Rakwa. The mouth of the Klamath River below pushed into the Pacific Ocean. Cape made a U-turn in that foggy breath, circumventing columns of mist, picked up Dentilium before traveling back east. Waiting a line of bandolier bags. Feather Cape, they said. We saved you a spot. Rejoining their company, they spoke all night. The cape of a matriarch. Shells pave the Milky Way. Feathers lift our little words. We carry the heavy, we carry the light. Always this loss, always this joy. Weave on, fearless, not faceless. We are not oyster middens. We speak for ourselves. Right, that's the end of the first 2 poems. That was the finished product after hours and hours of work. Still finding, we joke at our house, still finding little turkey feathers around the house. My husband's finding them. I was like, there's still this turkey feather. Way after we shipped it over to Brooklyn. So I'm going to be reading a selection of poems I've written in the last few years. Those first 2 that I read for you were the most recent ones after I finished the Cape project and was processing that. I want to reach back now to last July. When I was on the Little Island Park in Manhattan, I had a great conversation with a few ladies about dispossession and connection to land. These women were immigrants from other parts of the world, and they were struck by the theme of dispossession in some of my poems, and they wanted to know, how do you have a sacred relationship with a place when your ancestors aren't from that place? And, I've really thought about that question, and I don't know if I answered it quite well at the time. But the question made me think of the area that I grew up in, which is San Diego, which is Kumeyaay country. And as a child of the 80s and 90s, I spent most of my time playing outside. I was the unsupervised generation. And as I grew into a young woman, I recognized that there were certain places that I was drawn to go and pray, where I felt safe, where I felt strong, where I could sense life forms greater than myself, and where I had reverence. It was almost as if at these places the sacred in other life forms was nodding at the sacred in me. And I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't trying to make sense of the world. I was just being. So to answer this question, I believe that paying attention to how your body feels in certain places is very important, because certain places aren't meant for everyone. Like sometimes a place is a bad fit for us. But as human beings, we all have certain places or meridians that we are drawn to. And if we take care of those places, they take care of us. And it's our right as human beings, to access the sacred in this way, in a responsible way, in a way that's not entitled. When I am in my Eastern homeland and my Lenape ancestors, I feel like I belong in the most profound way. I also know, though, that I belong simply because I exist. I'm a walking, breathing extension in the homeland. And that gives me comfort, too. So this next poem kind of touches on the concept that I just discussed. It's called Passage. Keys open doors, and some keys never leave us. Those left on a car hood, speeding down a highway, those dangling from an unattended door, practically begging to be stolen. Those pertaining to water and birthing children. Those that throw doors open with gusts of leaf, light, and wind, like unexpected pleasure. Keys bind us, hanging on a chain around our neck to help us remember. You can't take away my homeland. My body is my homeland. You can't kick me out. Even as I fall from the sky, even as I land on a dark shell, clutching seeds in my palm, there, my children will grow. I really respect what I've learned about the expansiveness of Lenape kinship. We, for instance, we had no words for cousins. They were siblings. We had no words for a great aunt or a great uncle because they were our grandmothers and our grandfathers. When I have had the good fortune to spend time with the older Lenape generations of my family, I have experienced generosity, inclusivity, and hospitality. I believe those are core Lenape values. Our people also have a very strong ethical barometer. Our people would fight, would go to war for others outside of our cultural group if we thought it was the right thing to do. So I'm going to share with you a few more poems that kind of go back into history to the mid 1800s, which is one of my favorite time periods to study. It's a fascinating time period. It's the time when our band of Lenape people, which are the Unami dialect speaking people, we lived in Kansas, one of the relocation points, and still had so much rich culture, even though that was the beginning when our children started to go to the Baptist school there and were discouraged from, speaking their language and cutting their, and they had their hair cut and such. But our culture was still very, much prolific and strong at that point, and we were simultaneously going to war. So these poems focus on the roles of the matriarchs and my family, and also the warriors while we lived in Kansas, and then were en route to Indian Territory as well, which is now called Oklahoma. This is called The Protectors. For years, the men resisted building fences, an unnatural foreign construct. No resistance was shown to fighting pro-slavery settlers, the protectors, historically known for the negotiation of peace. The time and place of the people called for something else. 1862, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Out of 201 Delaware males between ages 18 to 45, 170 volunteered in the service of the Union. The fine-featured face of William Quantrill slips into the sleeping town of Lawrence, Kansas, But the guerrillas of white supremacy shoots every seen boy and man, looting, setting the town aflame. Mary Half and her daughter Jane watched Lawrence smolder from across the river. No men home here. They think they're next. It was said they were protected by dolls, a man and a woman. It was said they were protected by Simon White Turkey. The raiders never reached Fort Leavenworth, but others did, encroach slowly, like mold, making our home untenable. The few that choose US citizenship stay in Kansas. Those who stay Indian move on to Indian Territory, later known as Oklahoma. Journey of the Dolls. The dolls travel with their keeper, Mary's sister, Makotes, Granny. 985 men, women, and children with seeds, regalia, dances, and dolls. 985 survivors of Ohio, Indiana, Missouri, and Kansas. 985 Lenape people rode horseback and ox-drawn wagons to Indian Territory. Why? Shady deals between railroad companies and Congress, steady onslaught of settlers thieving land and animals en route to California in rush to be paid for fresh scalps of Indians. California reimburses top dollar at the courthouse, gold in the Klamath River. We moved on. The trickle of federal annuities did not pay for stolen land and continued. Held stomp dances, recorded stories, Unami dialect with outsiders, with the foresight, this must be kept. Granny hosts a dance each spring in Oklahoma for the dolls that live in the rafters of her home, fed and dressed members of her family. Until 1909, when she passes at age 108. The dolls join her in her grave. Ceremonies sleep until awakened from glass coffins of collectors, from uncarved wood, unsewn garments, unopened hearts of youth, until acceptance of rules and care. So this next poem is about in Oklahoma time, the place where my father grew up. My father was the first in his family to graduate from high school and college and was a mathematician in San Diego for 40, 50 years. That's why he grew up over there. And a very accomplished mathematician who even in his 80s just published an article on game theory. So his intelligence is beyond mine in that regard. So there's this story he used to tell me throughout my childhood is one of his favorite stories he told me, but it was about a very special matriarch and her name was Lil Creek. And she practiced our traditional plant medicine. She was a very well-known character. And so this poem is about the role she played in my dad's life. Plant medicine. Our people never lost plant medicine. Forest extended from New York to the edge of Oklahoma. We gathered along the way, in the right way, made an Eastern hole and an offering. Touch the plant as delicately as the patient. Lil Creek did just that to save my dad's life. 1940, Ketchum, Oklahoma. Delivered by a veterinarian, born 40 years old, sick and starving, till the wild grape, till the elderberry, till the prayers of Lil Creek. Knowledge kept, knowledge shared, so the babies may live, so the children of the babies and their babies may live. So these next few poems are dedicated to young people. my hopes for young people, especially Lenape people. My message for them is that one thing I've learned in this life is that our bodies have memories that we inherit from our ancestors. We inherit gifts, we inherit struggles, but this life that you have is new, and is, you know, your responsibility to carry our culture forward in a new way and in a good way. This poem is called Continuance. Dear young people, what is beauty? The balance of negative space in a bandolier bag, each stitch a seed of thought of what came before, of what comes next. By People Force West, Indian Removal Act, Lenapehoking, seen through calico from India, glass beads from Europe, the marriage of loss and abundance, prairie style. What new form will you stitch? Each thought, each action, each relationship a stitch? Will you outline your pattern with tiny white beads? The spirits of the Milky Way have the last say. Not all the men died. We adorn our men because of the light that hits that glass bead. That hanging bauble chimes like water falling. Those tufts of dyed red deer hair let us know we can feed our children. Bags that hold nothing and everything. Bags that left our people for a time in the trek from Kansas to Oklahoma. Some stolen, some sold, so that we could live. Wished back into existence by one seed in one man's heart. Now we remember what is beauty, generosity, feeding each person who arrives at your door. The way a man loves those with no blood relation and makes them his own. What is beauty? Her eyes, strands of money circling her neck, the songs that gather the people, water drums setting the pace, the laughter, the responsibility to place, to Manito. Beauty is the feast after the pain when all are acknowledged for their work. Beauty is the work, the ache, the call in your heart. What is it saying? What will you create? It won't be the same, but it was never meant to be the same. It will be right for your time, your family, your world. It will take discipline, humility, and beauty. Helper. Go into the empty spaces and cry. Though none answers your call, cry again. Watched. Your ancestors have done this for thousands of years, the script etched in your cells. Disintegration. Like a stalk gone to seed, collect your gifts on the ground. Feed your benefactor. Swallow your blessing. Tie a tobacco pouch around the neck of your blessing. Carve your blessing. Sing your blessing. Be careful with whom you share your blessing. Hoard your blessing and be sick. Brag on your blessing and grow mold. Mourn your blessing if it's stolen. The source replenishes itself in other ways. This next poem was written, it was inspired by a trip I took last summer to a cornfield where our Lenape corn seeds were being planted once again. There's also a response in this poem to a historical document I encountered called The Seal of New Amsterdam. It quite poignant imagery in the seal. It's what the early Dutch settlers renamed the area. In this imagery, there's a beaver encircled by a strand of wampum with a crown on top. So that was the imagery that they put together for that place. And so I had a response to that in this poem. This is called The Seal of Lenapehoking. And I also just want to, just a finer note on pronunciation. I mentioned earlier, I come from the Unami speaking Lenape people. And I was told that the proper way to pronounce our homeland in our dialect is Lenape Hawking. So Hawking, not Hoking. I believe in the Muncie dialect, the northern dialects, they say Lenape Hoking. And most people seem to want to say Lenape Hoking. So I've just, been saying that, even though our dialect says Lenape Hawking. But I wanted to go with the flow and with what people are most comfortable with. But so if you hear people say Lenape Hawking, that's why. So I go back and forth. The seal of Lenape Hawking. Beaver was not money. Beaver built a lodge, dove into the hole, retrieved clumps of mud, built earth on Turtle's back. Land isn't sold, it is taken. Money isn't born, it is made. The seal of this land is not a crown. Who's your money? Not the shells of 1626 in the palms that snuffed out fire. Communication from low points on the river to high points on the river. Our currency is fire. First stone, greet the stone by name and make friction with your hands, with your thoughts. Fire follows. Use fire to move. Movement is currency. Use fire to feed. Sustainability is currency. Use fire to clear underbrush. Plant medicine is currency. A clear mind is currency. Allows you to lay out your stories one by one. Take the bean out of your sack and put it on the table. Our voices are currency. Spot each other like fireflies in the quiet of dusk when lines dissolve. In distance, we are close. Took our bodies and voices when we left Lenape Hoking. Return them today. In the darkness, build a lodge, braid a new seal from husks of harvest. Harvest is our home. The sisters returned, replanted along a singing creek, germination and warmth, stretching, releasing a taproot. What looks like a blade of grass is our grandmother, getting thicker, becoming stalk, sprouts tassels laden with pollen, extends silks that move in wind and receive. One kernel from each silk, each one carries her milk. Home is our harvest, carried home on our backs for generations, kept the sisters safe, shared the milk, brought them back. Reunion, ground waves up and down, increased rate of heart, pat the dirt, steady it, inhale deeper with each step, thump of feet keeps her calm, imprints a new seal. Friends are waiting. They help sharpen our teeth. So the last poem that I'll end with this evening is my hope for future events in Lenape Hockey. My people were really good about keeping many wonderful social songs and dances. In Oklahoma, and I know the other bands of Lenape have been very good about keeping their cultural traditions too, and keeping them in their community. I would love one day for us to gather again as a people in the homeland in these special places along the river, and to hear those songs again that left the homeland that were kept, and let's hear those songs again in the homeland. The seats have been brought back. Now I'd love to hear the songs. And so this poem kind of represents that hope. Raven remembers. Kunt Gong, place, to dance. Sexuachulans, this bird is black. Raven's beak is open, rigid like a mask, head center, tilt sideways right. Head center, tilt sideways left. Heads moved like deer, she remembers. We can me, dance with me. Head center, tilt sideways right. Head center, tilt sideways left. Quick, deliberate movements to a beat. Ipaha, glee, when many gathered, highest point on the river. Hipaha, glee. Lenape men dance like deer, she recalls, taught her children these movements and so forth. They've returned like handkerchiefs from hands of loved ones, were you loaned to another land? Is the deal done? Are you dear? Arrival by canoe, anticipation. So many to greet the little, the big. Water offered. A nod to the woman made of light. A tree grows out of stone. Time to eat. Manishi, that's it.
Thank you so much, Becky. It was beautiful to listen to these, and an honor to have you here on our virtual stage. And as Monique says in the chat, may the songs be brought back to Lenapehoking. If the library can help that in any way, we certainly will. I will mention to everyone here, as you gear up to ask questions, we have a few already. Here are a few more upcoming events having to do with plant medicine and return of seeds, the return of fruit trees, and more. So Becky, thanks again. That was beautiful. Liz in the chat asks, my 9-year-old son would like to know, where did you find the turkey feathers to make the cape?
Well, we had time limitations in creating the cape. In an ideal situation, it would have been neat to have, gone to the different ranches and, had a relationship with the person who is caretaking those animals and, gathered them, but that would have been a much longer process. And, the cape, it represents this web of social relationships and social exchanges. And so we used the internet. We used the internet to source some ranches that were selling turkey feathers. Turkey feathers are popular for people to use in different projects. People, because they're a really sturdy, strong feather. People use them, to paint. You can paint on a turkey feather like fairly well, and people do incredible canvases on them actually. And so we just source them online, and because of the time limitations, we just had like a month and a half to create it, when normally this might take like up to a year to create. We also, we purchased online the hemp netting that was pre-woven to, for us to twine and attach the feathers on. But, traditionally the netting, the plant materials, the fibers for the plant materials would have been gathered, and that they would have been woven, and the netting was woven as the feathers were attached. And so that was we did it in a more contemporary way to fit the time constraint using the internet, but using very, very old methods too. Like I said, I used what I learned from a Yurok weaver, the twine method, because I do know that we use the twine method to attach the feathers. So I knew how to twine and weave in that way. And fortunately, I'm married into a family with wonderful cultural skills. My mother-in-law has been making regalia for the ceremonial dances of the Yurok people for most of her life. And so she was able to kind of figure it out with me in that way.
And I think you've touched on this. Another question very much related to the cape was the material you attach the feathers to. And I think you said that was the netting, right?
The hemp netting, yeah.
Broadening back from that a little bit, you said you referred to how there was a time crunch. Can you talk a little bit about getting connected back to Joe Baker and the Lenape Center and how that all happened and how that led to the Turkey Feather Cape? And then I want to ask you some questions about poetry after that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so during the, I think it was the first year of the pandemic when everything shut down, when we all went inward, suddenly I was home. I wasn't working. I was homeschooling my son. And we were spending so much time indoors. I think we couldn't even go to the beach at one point here in San Diego. The beach was banned, which was like sacrilegious. So we were indoors a lot. And then that's when I started to notice, I just kind of stumbled upon it online somehow, the work of the Lenape Center. And I was drawn to what they were doing because there was a time that I visited New York City, Manhattan, when I was doing work with Grantmakers in the Arts, the organization in Manhattan about 20 years ago. And I remember when I was there, I was just looking around and I felt kind of sad and lonely. And I was like, where are my people? Where are they? And, and I could feel my people in the snow and the nature. I felt this wonderful connection to the place. I felt like, oh, I belong in this Eastern hemisphere. But I was like, where is everyone? And it's like, is everyone just, sticking to the diaspora communities? There's no movement here. There's no action. And so I always kind of felt like I felt that lonesomeness. And so I remember that feeling. And so when I saw that they were actually doing work in the homeland and trying to foster more reunions amongst the different bands of Lenape from, up north, across the Midwest, to gather together for symposiums to discuss histories. And that was very comforting to me. And so that's when I reached out and began talking with Joe Baker. And then as we, during our talks, we realized we were related. Our families are had a really tight social alliance during the time when we moved from Kansas to Oklahoma. Grandmother traveled with Joe's family, and so we're not totally sure if we know it was at least a social alliance. We're not totally sure if it was blood relation, but our families were very closely connected. And so it was neat to reconnect again a few generations later. And that's when during that COVID year in that darkness is when I first started actually thinking about the feather cape. I always knew that the feather capes were the garment of warmth, and pre-contact was the more common garment what people wore for practical reasons. It's beauty, of course, aesthetically it's beautiful, but it's very warm and practical. And that's when I started thinking about the feather cape and started writing about it in some of the short story that I was doing. And so I brought it up in conversations with Joe. And then when I was over in the homeland in the summer, Joe had started discussions with you all at the Brooklyn Public Library. And then that's when in a brainstorm session, Joe was like, well, you should make a life-size one. Because at first I was like, oh no, maybe I can make a miniature feather cape. I didn't think I was like worthy to make a full-size feather cape. It's like, kind of not worthy to try and do something like that. But then he's like, no, you should make a full-size one. I was like, okay. So
I know Joe spends quite some time to make some of the bandolier bags that are also in the exhibit.
Yeah.
Your cape is kind of in a place of pride in the middle of all those bandolier bags, which I think have taken Joe as long as 2 years to make. It sounds like you had to do this a little faster for the exhibit within a year.
We did a little faster. Yeah, but luckily, because I didn't do it alone, my Sandra Lowry, my mother-in-law, my partner in this, there was no way I could have done that alone. And she's very fast. She has fast fingers because she's been, beading and doing regalia for years. And so I was very slow at first. And she would just kind of watch, I'd watch her and then I would try it. And then, of course, I was slow. But then I got into the hang of it. I was faster.
And Kayleen is asking, I know I said I'm going to turn to poetry in a moment, but I'm seeing this question about the cape. Did only women or do only women wear the capes is Kayleen's question. And if you could open that up and talk a little bit about what's known about when and how these were used and worn and et cetera, whatever you know.
Well, I think Joe has learned that, they were worn by men and women. They were worn by everyone. There were... we've pretty much figured out that their capes that, are fancier than other capes. Like, the one that I made for this exhibit was probably be on the fancy side because I added the money shells, the Dentilium shells, and we added beads. And so it makes sense that there's going to be capes that are reserved for more like special occasions or kind of dignitary events when groups are meeting and to indicate a certain status within the tribe, a leadership role. And then there are ones that are going to be more common, like even blankets, the feather blanket, and there's going to be ones that are just more like everyday.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your poetry practice, and starting with something as simple as where can folks read your poems?
Okay. Well, I believe a few of my poems are being included in the anthology, correct? The Brooklyn Public Library is producing an anthology that will include more historical documents, more information on the diaspora, and some of my poems will be in there. And for now, it's just there. I just recently started writing again. I got my undergraduate degree in creative writing at UC San Diego back in the mid 90s. And I was doing quite a bit of writing back then and poetry and was published in the journals at that school. And then there came a point where I just got kind of tired of the English language. And I was like, the English language just has these limitations and I was tired of it. And I wanted, I was drawn to doing more community work. I just wanted to put my energy into real tangible things like people. And I got into teaching and into social work and the community work and being a mother, it took me for a number of years. And then it was really, I would say the year before COVID hit was when I started writing more poetry and getting back into that. And so far it's just been at events where you can hear my poems.
Terrific. Yeah, and if you come to these events, we'll have your email on file so we could keep you updated on how to get a copy of that anthology. As Becky says, her poems are peppered throughout it, and it'll also include essays on forced removals, the Lenape histories of Westward, forced migrations, forced removals, and a lot of other topics. We are getting more comments and questions about the Cape as well. A facilitator called Maya asks or mentions that the Turkey Feather Cape remains a fan favorite among kids and adults, as Maya is a facilitator at the Greenpoint exhibit. Thank you, Maya, for saying that, and thank you for serving effectively as docents and security guards and guarding the objects and all that our all volunteer staff of docents have been doing diligently since the end of January for us. Super, super valuable. And then just, in a kind of way of combining these things, what was it like to go from creating the Turkey Feather Cape, imagining it in this exhibition, to then kind of stepping back and writing these poems, partly with, I think some of them were written before the exhibit and some were written, I would say, clearly with the exhibit in mind. And so what was the difference between those two processes?
Well, I think I'm kind of seeing that, they're very similar in the sense that my poems are very kind of experientially based. I can only write if I'm inspired, and I'm inspired usually by the completion of very tangible projects, in a relationship with that project, relationships with people. Maybe that's the social worker in me, but it's kind of poetry is the language in which I process kind of the alchemy, the relationships, the exchanges between me and different objects and in nature and in people, relationships with ancestors, relationships with historical information. It's it's a little bit, it is a kind of a weaving process of and it helps me articulate and make meaning of the experience in a way that the linear nature of prose and how we normally talk and how we normally speak just sometimes doesn't quite capture the meaning or the truth of, what we experienced in life. And that's why, just for my entire life, I've always preferred the language of poetry and helping me understand and helping me process existence. It's it made more sense to me from a pretty young age.
That's lovely. For you, is there a perfect poem out there that was maybe the first to inspire you to write poetry, or is there a perfect poem out there that you go back to more than others?
Yeah, in high school, I was definitely influenced by the anthologies of the Native writers that started to come out at that time that involved Joy Harjo, especially in those pieces of literature. They just definitely spoke to me and inspired me and said, oh, they're speaking to me. This is my language. This is, they're from different tribes than me, but we're speaking a common language. We're seeing the world in a common way. And so since it is a teen, it's like, oh, that's the language. That makes
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, it looks like we have some people who haven't asked a question yet, so I'm going to give you another few seconds to drop that in the chat if you have one, and if you are taking a little moment to write it, wait first, and we'll wait for it. But meanwhile, Becky, it's been so special to read these poems as the anthology forms, and then to read them while the exhibit has been up and when it was going up, and to just see them next to the essays in the anthology, and then to hear you read them here tonight. I'm just so grateful and humbled and honored and appreciative of your work. And I can't wait until you have what you consider to be enough work for a manuscript to be published, hopefully somewhere in the country, maybe even here in Lenapehoking, of your own work, separate from the anthology. But do you have any final thoughts for your devoted audience who are all saying praiseful things to you?
Yeah, I'm not done writing about the Feather Cape project. So I think that, there were quite a few lessons learned while I was weaving the feathers and thinking about it from the kind of a social emotional learning. A lot of my clinical social work has been with children, and my training has been in early childhood mental health. And so I would like to write, I have some rough ideas written down, but I want to write a full children's story that's incorporating the tenets of and lessons of early childhood mental health. So we know in our country, we're having kind of a crisis with mental health with children, and children are really struggling. And there are a lot of basic skills that were kind of lost during the pandemic years, and they're catching up in any way that we can reinforce those kinds of intelligence and skills. And children's books, I think, is really important right now. And also, incorporating the beauty of the cultures of this place. And so I'm not done writing yet about that. So and there will be more on the Cape.
Well, Devin asks, does teaching Cape making interest you? And Chip says, have you come across other Lenape poetry? So these just slipped in at the buzzer.
Yeah, I am interested, in teaching feather weaving. Yeah, I'm still processing and digesting the experience myself. And so I'm not quite ready at that point, but I will be. It's something that I want to do. And yeah, growing up, I didn't see a lot of Lenape poets in the anthologies. I feel like our people have been really sometimes invisible and pretty low key on the national scene of cultural expression. And so I really do appreciate the work of Lenape Center and, in uplifting our voices. And because, yeah, we are just perfectly capable of expressing ourselves, talking for ourselves. We don't need people to do that for us. And, we do have so many strengths and talents. And so it's, I appreciate your work in helping to uplift our voices, so we're not so invisible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is the library's role is kind of like connector, and we're honored to do it, and we're connecting you with your own audience, not ours. And I'm sure people are coming in from around the country and from around Brooklyn and New York. And it's wonderful to be in this Zoom with you, Becky. And I can't wait till we can meet in person. I feel like I know you from all of this exhibition work. Thanks to our audience for being here and for your encouragement and presence. Becky, I can't wait till the next event that we get to do together now or in the future. And thanks again, Wanishi, for being here and for teaching us.
Manishi, thank you, everyone.